You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. I'm sorry, I'm not doing it the wrong way.
This is Play-by-Play Cast, the world's #1 sports media podcast. Wait, what?
Nobody's fact-checking it. Just keep going.
Here we go.
Who the hell is Happy Gilmore?
Got all that on camera, right, John?
Sure, I did.
All right, because the red light was not on.
The podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster.
Oh, you can stick me in some kind of Italian boat because that one is gondola.
Now, from New York, really?
All the big ones are from New York.
Your host, Joe Godet.
It's still Joel.
Yeah, he will not be able to see very well, Cotton.
All right, back at it. It is Play-by-Play Cast, episode number 184, the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by one. This professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. We found out this week the NBA is returning July 31st. Still don't know about baseball, so Scott Franzke has some time on his hands. And he's a guest this week on PXP Cast. He's the radio voice of the Philadelphia Phillies. If you missed last week's episode 183, it's with Dwayne Statz of the Tampa Bay Rays, their TV voice, Marv Albert. He'll be a little bit busier now in August with the NBA returning. He was our guest on episode number 182, the voice of the NBA on TNT, Larry Kahn from Sports USA Radio. Fingers crossed for an NFL season that works out as best as possible. He was episode number 181 if you want to go back through the archives here. You can find the podcast on social media at PXPcast. I am at Joel Godet, JGODETT at BSU.edu. It's been a heck of a week, folks. I know some of the people that listen to this podcast know why, because they have applied. But at Ball State, we have an opening for a women's basketball broadcaster and my football sidelines guy on our football broadcast as well, guy or girl, on our football broadcast too. So we advertised the position this week, and in the first 4 hours, I think I got 60 emails. We are up to, as we record this podcast, 125 people have applied to be the voice of Ball State women's basketball and our football sideline reporter as well. It has been incredible because I've tried to, not tried to, I've done. I have sat down and listened to every demo that every person has sent in and replied to each and every one of them here to start things off, just to say thanks, listen to your stuff. Here's what I thought was good, a couple of things that jumped out at me, and we'll go from here. And it's been enlightening to just see how different people apply, what different people say. Yeah, I guess there's always whenever you go to, like, how do you professionally present yourself courses, or when you're in college, they say, like, here's an example of a cover letter, and here's an example of a resume. So I guess you see those things anyway. But when you are the hirer, so to speak, it's fascinating to see what people send, how they send it, how they present themselves, and to kind of get the perspective of the way different people go about things. Because, I'm 33 years old. Like, anytime I send anything or have sent anything in my career to anybody, like, I know what I've sent and how I do it. It's wild to see the variety of different ways that people approach reaching out for jobs. And I've enjoyed going through all of these resumes. It's been a lot, but I've really enjoyed the process and looking forward to seeing where we go from here with it and who we wind up selecting for it. So just wanted to start off on that note today. And if you hear my email ping while we're going here, I think I got a resume at 4 a.m. I have to go back and look at timestamps. They've been coming in fat. Yep, 4:47 a.m. I got one. 2:04 a.m., 4:47 a.m., and then all was clear until 8:30. But I've been getting a bunch, so it's been cool. Scott Franzke is a guy that knows, and there is my email. Scott Franzke is a guy that knows about applying for positions and betting on himself. Scott was quote unquote, in the major leagues in the early 2000s, late 90s. 1997, 1998 was doing, pre and post for the Texas Rangers and wanted to do play-by-play. And he bet on himself and left the major leagues and left a big market and left his home market. And he went to Chicago, and he became the play-by-play voice of the Kane County Cougars in the Low A Midwest League, and took that experience and got himself back to the major leagues, back in his home market in Texas in 2002, and then eventually he joined the Philadelphia Phillies in 2006, and through time has morphed into his current role as their lead radio play-by-play voice. So we talk a lot in this episode with Scott about that journey and the believing in yourself and the betting on yourself and the improvement that he saw and that he went through and how he went about it early on in his career. And then we'll dive into his experience with the Phillies as well. Larry Anderson was one of his first partners with the Phillies, and one of the things he was told was, the Phillies wanted him to shine. So we'll talk about setting up your analyst and making him shine and trying to put him in the best possible position. Good conversation with Scott Franzke that I hope you'll enjoy here on episode number 184 of PXPcast. So the one thing I thought was interesting, because we have a lot of conversations on this podcast about how there's no one way to get to anywhere in this business, and how everybody's path is unique and sometimes irreplicable. And I thought yours was interesting from the standpoint of being in Texas and going to minor league baseball and leaving a major league team, although not the position you ultimately wanted, to go to the minors and get that experience, which then led you to winding up back in the majors. And I've read and I've heard you talk about the rationales for go and do play-by-play on a day-in and day-out basis. But I was curious if you can kind of take me into your thought process about maybe the nervousness of leaving the majors in a major market and moving away from the idea of kind of being around and maybe being that guy that becomes a next man up possibility because you're around big league teams a lot, and rolling the dice going down to the Midwest League.
Yeah. It's, it was a little bit of a roll in the dice, but I don't know. It was also kind of calculated. I thought a lot about it. At that point in my life, I was doing talk show stuff for Texas. I was working for the radio station, but I was around the ball club and I was around the broadcast and I was on pre and post game. But I wasn't getting any reps to do baseball play-by-play. I was getting reps to do, say, high school football, small college football, high school basketball. It just wasn't much baseball. And it really was the two guys with the Rangers at the time, Eric Nadel and Vince Cotroneo. They both really just sort of said, look, if you're going to do this, you have to find out, A, if you can, because, doing a game here and there is a whole lot different than trying to do it every single week, every single night, 6 times a week, I should say. So, and the other flip side of that was you may not like it. You may not like working that much. Suddenly maybe I would be a lot more interested in a football gig or something like that. But I had a pretty good inkling that I didn't want to be stuck in the studio, that I just didn't get the same thrill that I would from being at the field, whether it's baseball, football, or courtside or whatever. Right. I wanted to be at the event. I wanted to do events, and I think you're right in that there's no one way. But for me, it just seemed like, look, I'm going to have to get some reps somehow. And yes, while I could sit around and wait for that, maybe some guy gets sick and you get a chance in a pinch and they say, yeah, we really enjoyed it. But you're really not gaining any ground. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you're not learning how to get better. And I think, I don't know, it probably doesn't matter what you're doing in the world. whether it's broadcasting or sales or anything under the sun. Experience makes all the difference, and doing it over and over again makes you better and better. And so I think that was invaluable for me.
It sounds logical now, but how much convincing of yourself did it take at that time to make that actual jump and buy into that and sell it to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, when I go back 3 or 4 years before that, and when I first got out of college, I didn't really want to leave Dallas.
Right.
I didn't want to leave a big market. I had gone to school at SMU and made some inroads, and a lot of my colleagues in journalism school, they were talking about maybe starting out as a reporter in a small town or a small market, something like that, and I just didn't really want to do that at that time, and I didn't really want to leave Texas. I wanted it to happen, but I also again knew that, or I got convinced. I think it's basically just came down to the fact that Eric convinced me that I needed to go practice. I needed to go learn how to do it.
How'd the first season in Kane County go? Or maybe how'd the first month in Kane County go?
The first night in Kane County, we're about 2 minutes into our broadcast, and it started raining, and they pulled the tarp, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do, if I was supposed to keep it for an interview or if I was supposed to send it back to the studio. Like, I was just trying to get the equipment set up, and we had never discussed what to do in the event of a rain delay. And so I was pretty much, I was just stammering on the air, but I ended up finally taking a break, and I went, we had a guy on our team, Derek Wathen was his name. He was our shortstop, a young kid, and his dad, John Wathen, obviously with his baseball background, was in the stands to watch Derek play. And I knew he had been there. I hadn't met him, but I had heard he was there. So I took a commercial break, and I said, just keep it in commercial as long as you can, and I'm going to try to get an interview to put on the air. So I ran down into the stadium and found him and pulled him aside, and he was great. He came on the air with me for about 20 minutes and got me through my first rain delay. So, and actually now his other son, Dusty Wathen, is the third base coach with the Phillies. So I've talked about that, and I've caught up with not only Derek but also John a couple of times through the years.
I came very close to interviewing Batman during a rain delay once. So
is that right?
Yeah,
that would have been so cool.
I don't know how he would have taken it, because not the real guy, but have fun with it.
I think when you first start out in those first that first month, there's a lot of just learning, and it's going by so fast, and you're just trying to keep your head above water, and you start to realize what what Eric and Vince were talking about in terms of doing it every single day, and
right.
the repetition of it. How many times in a week do you call a ground ball to the shortstop, right? I mean, and that's the kind of stuff that you don't get a chance to, vary your delivery if you're doing one high school game a week. Or I wouldn't say you don't get the chance, but it's not the same. It takes a lot longer to develop that if you're not doing it 140 times a year, that kind of thing, 140 games a year or whatever.
I was going to ask what you learned, but I mean, that's a big piece of it. But also, what did you learn about covering a team day in and day out as a broadcast voice, as opposed to, the role you had on a broadcast team previously?
Yeah, I think one of the things I discovered quickly, at least, and I haven't found that this necessarily translates as you go up the ladder, but at that level, it was low A ball. And, the honest truth is your listeners are, the moms and dads of the players. they are the host moms and dads, the host families, and they are girlfriends, and maybe just a few assorted baseball nuts. Now, again, my experience may be a little bit different because, we're on the radio. Kane County is basically Chicago.
Right.
And we're on the radio in suburban Chicago. And so I don't know, maybe it's different in a small market. More just random fans want to know what the local minor league team is doing. But our situation wasn't like that. So what I found was that I'm broadcasting to friends and family, and it was fast when if I had ever said something that a friend or family didn't think was cool, or I was criticizing or whatever, by the time I pulled on the bus after the game, I was hearing about it already. And this is in the early days of, cell phones, and, it wasn't like the crazy texting. Like they were on the phone already. By the time I got on the bus, they're like, yeah, my mom said you said XYZ. And I'd be like, well, we could go back and listen to the tape. I think your mom heard XYZ when the truth is I said, ABC. And usually the players are, again, you get to know them really well and you're on the bus with them all the time and you're around them all the time, and there's not 20 other media people around. It's like you and the ball club, and 3 coaches, and the bus driver. Like that's the universe that you live within, and so you get to know those guys pretty good, and their families get to know you as well, and they'll let you know if they didn't think you were fair to their son.
It's interesting you wound up in Kane County for 3 years. You wind up back in Texas. But I thought one of the other interesting pieces of it was the idea of betting on yourself again, because when you got the Phillies job, you had almost said to yourself, I wanted to call more play-by-play. Maybe I'll go back to the minor leagues again. How different was that process of coming to grips with being okay making that decision the second time through after you'd been in the big leagues in a more expanded role?
Yeah. So the first year back in the big leagues, or the first year back with Texas in 2002, I guess it was, I think I did 25 games as the number 2 announcer. And the next year I didn't do any. Sort of the domino effect changed. And so that position really wasn't there. And then I think it was 1 game the year after that, and then maybe 5 or 6 games in 2005. And it just wasn't going to change. I didn't feel like it was going to change. I felt like at the time they had actually made a change with the number 2 announcer. Vince was not renewed, and they hired Victor Rojas. And at the time, the president of the club really wanted an ex-player as the second voice. And that's something, that's a role I could not fill.
Sure.
That honestly, in terms of betting on myself, I got to give a lot of credit to my wife, because I think it was her more than anybody that sort of embraced the idea that, look, you're not happy doing this studio stuff. You were here once before and you left for a reason. And, she, I think, was the one who really felt, said that she believed in me, that it was going to happen for me somewhere. And I just felt like I was getting, my skills were, I wasn't doing anything for myself. As in terms of being a play-by-play announcer, it wasn't growing. I wasn't getting reps. I wasn't getting exposure. I wasn't getting experience. It just, I just felt like it was kind of like a doomsday scenario. I didn't want to go back to the minor leagues, obviously. But I just wasn't happy, doing that. And there were a couple of minor league opportunities There were a couple of major league opportunities. It was a busy off season, and I was really lucky to end up where I ended up.
Networking is such a big buzzword of what everybody does nowadays, and having to create relationships and having the right relationships, and I'm one that always it's just inherent with how I am socially. I'm always very careful. Whenever you talk to people, you're I don't want to say the wrong thing. I got to do this the right way. And I liked the anecdote you talked about. You were on Donnie Barnes's podcast a few years ago, and you talked about your interview in Houston, and they told you that they liked you, but they didn't think you wanted the job enough.
Yeah.
And that you told that to the Phillies when you interviewed for their job. And my first reaction was oh my God, in my mind, I'm I can't say that to another team. That's not the right thing to say. Take me through what that was like.
Okay. So, I interviewed, the interview process with Houston was fine. I went down there, I interviewed. I didn't hear anything back from them. I read that someone else got the job, and I called the Astros after the fact and sort of inquired, and it took me a while to get them on the phone, and literally 3 or 4 days before I headed to Philadelphia, I finally talked to the club president with Houston that had been in as part of the interview. And that's when I heard we just didn't feel like you wanted the job enough. And, it was, again, I felt like maybe what they meant was I don't know if I played it I don't really know fully what they meant, but what I wanted to get across to them to the Phillies was, look, I'm here. This is really important to me. I want to be here. I want to do this. And if you could, I don't know how I'm going to sound. I don't know how I'm going to come across in the email. And believe me, I didn't tell the Phillies president, David Montgomery, this. Okay. I told the broadcast manager, Rob Brooks was the guy who we had built a little bit of a rapport. We had talked on the phone a bunch, and
sure.
And he was kind of the first line of communication in that, I had told him, I said, look, for instance, when I went to interview, they didn't know if they wanted a play-by-play person or not.
Yeah.
So he knew, because we talked pretty openly. We were very upfront with one another. And so I felt like I had enough of a rapport with Rob that when he drove me from the airport to the ballpark for the interview, and it's a short ride, and it's just kind of a small talk conversation, but I said, I talked to Houston. She told me I maybe didn't come across like I really wanted the job, and so I said, look, let me assure you, I want the job. If there's play-by-play to be had, I want it. So right, wrong, or otherwise, it worked out, I guess.
Well, it's one of those things that as I heard it, I just thought to myself that it's almost like a bold, to go into any interview situation and say to anybody, even when you have a rapport with the elephant in the listen, I want the job. I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. I want it. Clearly, I want it. I wouldn't be here otherwise. It's almost well, you can't do that. You can't let them know that you want it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, and maybe I'm wrong, and every employer would be different. Every level would be different. But I think when you say, you want, as somebody who hires somebody, for instance, in the minor leagues, what do they always tell you? They always tell you, we're going to hire you to be a broadcaster, but you're going to have to do other things.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't want somebody who's so stuck in their ways that they can't embrace pulling tarp, sweeping an aisle,
right,
sending out a press release, flipping a burger if need be. You know what I mean? They need the most versatile, open, accommodating employees they can possibly find to make their business work.
Right.
And I'm not saying, at this level in the major leagues, they're not necessarily looking for that, but they want to know that somebody is like excited to be there, right? They want to know that, and trust me, there's enough of us in this business that at certain days we can act like we don't want to be there. And some of them might be in our broadcast booth on a pretty daily basis, but I just think it's okay to let them know. It's okay to let somebody know you want the job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, yes, you're, like you said, you're there. You're there to interview. Of course you want the job, but do you really? Right? Why not go the extra mile and say, look, this is really important to me. I am, this is not just another job or not just another job interview for me. This is what I want. This is my dream, or this is the position for me, or whatever, And again, whether it's broadcasting or sales or, medicine or whatever, people want to hire somebody who wants to be there.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your broadcast booth now. There was a great anecdote where you talked about getting to the Phillies, and when you started doing play-by-play, they said they thought Larry Anderson was the funniest man in the room, and they wanted that to come out more on the air. And that you kind of looked at your early responsibility as that being your number one goal. Walk me through a little bit your approach in working with a guy like Larry, and how you went about saying to yourself, yes, I'm going to call the game. That's obviously very important, but there's also going to be a segment of my brain that is dedicated to how I'm going to make this man shine.
Yeah. Well, and it's second nature to most TV announcers, I think. Guys who do games on TV, because they're constantly setting up the analyst. They're constantly leaving a room for the analyst. It's, I think, far more difficult. It's not more difficult. It's a different process in radio, because you still have to focus on the play-by-play part of it. And I think for me, one thing it really helped me with early on, because we're talking about a stretch there where I didn't do very many games for a long time. And so I was, rusty in my own mind. Right. And so I needed to work back up to it. And I was doing the first year 2 innings a night. So that wasn't an overwhelming task. And again, I could come on there. It allowed me to be as basic as possible with my play-by-play, my descriptions, as solid mechanically as I could be, and then leave everything else for Larry, right? Leave all the other additional space for the crowd and for Larry. And so if I needed to push Larry, then I had plenty of time to do so. If I needed to quiz Larry or question Larry or engage him in some other way to set him up, then I had time to do so, because I felt like my play-by-play was as rudimentary as it comes, because that's all I needed to be. That's all I needed to be, because I could then rely on him to be himself, which was obvious right away to me, what a natural card he was and what a natural showman he was, on the air or off. And I think at times on the air, he could feel, whatever. He's worried about maybe saying the wrong thing or, whatever. But I think the fact of the matter that I could simply just do a really simple broadcast and let him handle most of the rest of it was really good for me. Now, as the years went on, I feel like we were able to do more and more, and we got to know each other better and better, and the rapport thing just comes along with it, and so it's not hard now for me to engage him. I just know who he is and where he wants to go and the kind of dumb stuff he wants to say and stuff like that. But and I kind of also now I've over 10 years into doing this with him, I have a way better appreciation for what our fans and what our listeners like from him. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that's like, there's something to be like, again, we have a responsibility to call the game and to broadcast the game and to tell what's happening and all those other things. But we're also trying to entertain people. And there's a lot of nights where the game isn't entertaining. So we better be if we want people to listen. And so I feel like I have a pretty good handle on, what people like. And, at least I hope I do.
The answer to this might be as simple as what you just said as well, but the majority of your play-by-play experience before coming to the Phillies was solo. So what was your thought process or worry or concern or how much did you think about, all right, how different is it going to be for me calling a game with a person sitting next to me and with a former player sitting next to me, and the ways that you have to engage that person as opposed to if it was, a secondary broadcaster who was sitting next to you as well?
Yeah, it was definitely it was an adjustment. And then for me to do it with just one guy for 10 years, and then to suddenly be asked to do it with other people, it's like that was a challenge as well, because again, you're so used to one guy's personality and you know what he's going to say, you know what he wants to talk about, the
easy buttons to push.
Yeah. But like, seriously, I've heard all of his stories. Like I've heard all his stories and I could tell most of them now. I can't say I can tell him as well as he does, but the point is, like, something happens in a game and I see the wheel spinning in his head. I can see the light behind his eyes. It's, here we come with the Renee Latchman story, or here we come with the story about Dennis Eckersley, and comes the story about the Camaro that he bought with his signing bonus or something like that. So it is a different thing because, again, you as a minor league announcer generally have to call the game and then do the analysis, right? So you roll back in with something, you're analyzing the play or analyzing the next pitch or whatever. I guess it probably helped me that I didn't go straight from one way of doing it to the other.
Sure.
With that break, having not done, if you go from doing the minor leagues and every night you're doing, the whole game by yourself, no partner, whatever, and then, okay, tomorrow you're going to start doing it with a partner for the rest of your life. That can be an adjustment, but I think for me, probably it helped that, again, like I said a minute ago, get in there, very basic descriptions, and then let the other guy do his, as we say, shtick. So. Who'd
you learn from? Like, who taught you or who did you listen to teach you play-by-play as you started out, I guess, in Kane County or even before then?
Well, I think I've not had a bigger influence on my career than Eric Nadel from a professional standpoint.
Sure.
Eric, and that goes way beyond just the time I've spent with Eric. I did my first big league game next to Eric, which, given that I was a kid who grew up listening to Eric, was pretty special for me. And I don't know, I was Mark Holtz, who had done the Rangers when I was younger, but was sick and then later died really before I was sort of in the the Rangers. I just wasn't doing it. I think my first year freelancing over there was, I think, Mark's last year of doing any kind of play-by-play. But Mark was the guy that I wanted to be Mark Holtz. Like that, I wouldn't say I wanted to be him, but he was the first he and Eric, I remember going, with my friends, we would listen to the games on the radio, and the Rangers were terrible. I mean, they were just terrible year after year. And, they would show these signs of life, in the late 80s or whatever, and the Ruben Sierra or Bobby Witt, or, these people you think are going to make a big difference. And, Bobby Valentine had been the manager then. And so it was sort of on the up, on the rise, but they were always out of it by, June or July. And, for most people in that part of the world, the Rangers were like this thing that you did until the Cowboys started. It was just like it literally was the idea of a pastime. It was like, we'll go to the old ball yard and watch some ball and get a free souvenir cup. And, and whatever they win or they lose, it doesn't matter. We'll still have the Cowboys in the fall. That's kind of how people looked at it. But my friends and I we were big baseball junkies, and we spent a lot of hours, listening to the games on the radio. And I've learned from Mark just by listening. I learned from Eric just by listening, and I learned a lot more from Eric by being around him, watching him work. He and Vince Cotroneo, who's now been with the A's for quite a while. Vince was very instrumental. Vince was up front there in terms of being a guy that would request to hear my tape when I was in the minors. Like he was proactive about it. It wasn't just like, hey, can I send you some audio sometime? Oh, sure. I'd love to have it listen. I mean, he's like calling me and saying,
Where's my audio? Yeah.
Yeah. Send me some tape. I want to hear how it's going. I want to hear what you're doing. I want to know. Yeah. And those two guys were without, question. But, even getting, I feel like I was still learning on the job when I got to Philly. So I think everybody you're around, you learn a little bit from. You take what you like from other guys, and you take what you think you can pull off from other guys, which, you only got what you got in terms of your pipes. You can't be Harry Callis all the time. So you got to let him be himself. And but that's something that Harry would tell you. You get into a big market where the broadcasts matter a whole lot more than, just wives, girlfriends, and friends of the minor leaguers. Harry was the first one to tell you, be yourself, just be you and everything will be fine. And, you'll do your job. You'll do it right. You'll do it well. And, you'll let the chips fall where they may, but where you're going to get in trouble is trying to be somebody you're not, or be somebody else.
Was that ever hard for you? Like, did you ever, when you started, was it hard to not be Eric or Vince or any of those guys?
I never felt like it was. I felt like I was just, for the first part of my life in the minors, I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water. So I spent a lot of time. By that point, I was just focusing on my tape as much as possible, and I would listen a lot to my tape and try to change my tape. But I never, I never felt like. And again, I don't know. Nobody's ever come to me and said, man, you sound just like Eric Nadel, because it's not really like that. But there are things I do that are just like Eric Nadel, that I try to emulate Eric. And part of that is just the idea that Eric is one, I think, of the true radio guys that does this, right? He's one of the true guys that still will tell you what color stripes are on the uniform, or what color details are on the uniform, what kind of details are on the uniform. And I think we all, sometimes we feel, I think in today's world, as I'm describing it, it's on a monitor next to me, right? So in a way, it feels weird to describe that as a modern day play-by-play guy, right? Because all of it's you're like, okay, for all the people that are maybe watching at home but have the radio on, this is just overkill for them, right? But it's the understanding that there are people who are true radio listeners, or they're in their car, or they've lost their sight, or they don't have access to a TV, or don't, whatever. They're at the lake, or they're on a boat, or whatever. That there are people out there that are truly listening to this on the radio, and you need to treat it like you're on the radio, even though everything it seems like we do now is somehow for video. You know what I mean?
Sure. I want to ask you about a couple of calls in particular. As I went back and listened to some things in preparation for this, and Halliday's no-hitter in the playoffs was interesting to me from the standpoint of the way that you started the end of that call. And like you said the time of day, and you mentioned the date, and then you mentioned that it was Halliday's first appearance in the playoffs as basically the scene. Like, you basically set history before it unfolded on that final play, which is an interesting conscious decision, and I think a really cool one in hindsight. And maybe I'm giving you more credit for thinking that out ahead of time, but what do you recall about that moment in time and calling that?
Well, I think in looking back, I mean, the fact that I was able to say that and then get so lucky as the game ended basically on this next pitch. I mean, that's just dumb luck. Broadcasters can do whatever they want to try to set that thing up. Suppose Brandon Phillips fouls off 6 pitches in a row, and then
not as great.
Right. So that's just dumb luck. It was a conscious decision to use the date and the time. And it goes back to, I read a story that Vin Scully had done that during Sandy Koufax's, I think it was a perfect game. And I think it was, he had, the time was on the clock, and he read it in, whatever in the City of Angels. I don't remember if he used the date or not, but yeah, I don't know. I just, yeah, I mean, again, it got lucky. I was lucky that it ended up being the play that ended the game, but it was a conscious decision to sort of timestamp it and give it the I don't know, like, it's the date and the time, and he's going to do this in his first ever playoff start, kind of thing. That had been the story going into it. But it wasn't how deep, like from a Phillies perspective, the story was not, are they going to beat the Reds? Because they all felt like they were going to beat the Reds, right? That they were going to advance. So their team was really good. This is a 2-time National League champions at this point. The whole story was Roy Halladay is going to finally get to pitch in the postseason after all those years in Toronto when he didn't. And that's why he came here. And here he is, game 1, first start, blah, blah, blah. Now he's going to do this. Unbelievable, right? So, yeah, it was a conscious decision, but it was also, dumb luck that that Phillips put the ball in play, and that's how the game ended.
Were you listening when they won the World Series? I know you were in a back room watching on TV, but could you hear Harry at that moment?
I could hear him only a little bit on an IFB. Like, I had a wireless headset on, because but it didn't work very well under the stands.
Sure.
Which is where I was. And once I got out on the field, I could start to hear. Well, I could hear a little bit of it, but the crowd was so loud it made it difficult. So I didn't really hear it unfold as it happened.
What was that moment like?
It was cool. It was for me. I mean, the whole lead up and the whole sort of atmosphere around it all was just amazing, and the wait for 2 days and the electricity of the crowd to finish it off and to do it there, and you play what amounts to a 2.5 inning game or whatever it is, like you talk about the lightning round, right? I mean, it's just like it's going to be over fast, and I remember standing on the mound as we came out on the field. They let the interviewer people come out on the field, and I grabbed as the sort of the celebration scrum was breaking up and the players were starting to not disperse, but just sort of spread out a little bit anyway. I grabbed Victorino for an interview, Shane Victorino, and I just stood on the mound and I'm watching him. I'll never forget just watching him look up at the crowd. And like, first of all, you see the joy in his eyes and his face and his body and how much this meant to him and his teammates. And then you see the same from the crowd, right? And you see him sort of bathing in that emotion of the crowd. And I look up and I look around and, I've been on big league ball fields. I don't walk onto the field very often, right?
Yeah,
you're not.
That's true.
You're not between the lines as a broadcaster very often.
Mostly in foul territory.
Right, right. And a lot of times you get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law if you're not. But I'm on the pitcher's mound, and I'm just thinking to myself, how do you guys do it? How do you guys do what you do, right? And then you see the reaction of the crowd, and you start to get a small notion of why you do what you do, why this would be the coolest job in the world, right? If you were good at it. So yeah, it was really, it was cool. And, just to be around a lot of people I was young then, I was new then. And, to be around a lot of people in the organization that had been there for years and years, waiting for something like this to happen again. You always heard the old stories of 1980 and whatnot, and what it was like to be in the parade and all that kind of stuff. And so it was cool. It was a cherished moment for sure.
Did you talk to Harry about the end of that game, or I guess have you ever thought about now since that time what it would be like to call the final out of a World Series?
Yeah, we had gone back the next year, and I would have gotten that chance had we won in 2009, the year Harry passed away. The Phillies were very kind to me. I got to call every final out except for the clinching games. As it turned out, whatever we would just juggle the play-by-play, and so Harry did the ninth inning on all the games where we had an opportunity to clinch the series, and it was really, really exciting for me to be able to be it was Harry's show, and it was Harry's. He didn't get to call that in 1980. The local announcers didn't get that chance then, and I know what that meant. For him to miss out on that, but also, for Phillies fans to sort of be robbed of their beloved Harry Kalas calling their team winning the World Series. So, for me, it was, I remember, on the float, Harry was on the trailer with us, and we had us and the Fanatic and, the broadcasters basically were on the one of the first flatbeds in the parade. And we were, before the parade really even started, we were stuck. They're kind of staging and trying to get people out of the street. And so we're just kind of not moving. We can't tell what's going on. And we're just not moving for 20, 30, 40 minutes. And this crowd around our float just showered Harry with affection. Over and over and over again. And to the point, I actually have a little bit of old school, Super 8 video. It's terrible. But I had a video camera that I'd been given for my wedding, back, I don't know, 20 years earlier. And I brought it with me. I said, you know what, the battery's going to die. I'll run out of tape or something, but I might as well get what I can get while I can get it. And so I have a couple of great shots of Harry, and he's just so taken by the reaction from the crowd and what he's sort of muttering under his breath. He just can't believe it, and he's so overwhelmed by it. And he's basically brought to tears overseeing it, up close. And obviously he died early the next year, and only a few games into the season. So I think Phillies fans are, we certainly love the fact that he got a chance to see that and to call it. And we're so blessed to have, been a part of that ride with him.
I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I do want to ask you, on a similar note, being able to see all of that and, kind of like become and witness part of Philadelphia Phillies history. You're a guy that is from Dallas and worked for the Rangers, except for that 3-year, period where you were up in Kane County. And then you come to Philadelphia, a new part of the country, a new team, a new organization. What was the effort for you like to become accepted by a new fan base, to learn about a new fan base, to learn about a team in a way that you felt like an authority figure on it? And how did you go about ingraining yourself that way?
Well, the learning part of it, there's, I guess, a couple things. I mean, I tried to first of all, rely on people who had been there before me. I spent a lot of time talking to Chris Wheeler, who was in our booth then. Anytime something historical or I needed reference to, I could look up box scores on Baseball Reference.
Sure.
But I could also go to Wheels and say, hey, I'm going to show you this box score from this game in 1978. And his memory was uncanny. And he could, and still can. He would have these great, this texture to the whole thing, relationships between players, what it was like then, what the team was like then, what the city was like then, what the fans were like then. So from that standpoint, I just tried to, number one, I didn't want to come in and act like I knew what I was talking about at all times. Especially when I didn't, the whole fake it till you make it, I guess, but I didn't want to be disingenuous and be like, here I am, this outsider, but don't worry, I know everything there is to know about the Phillies, right?
Yeah.
Because I learned it all I got hired on February 23rd, and it's now the 28th. Clearly, I know everything there is to know, right? So that's not real.
That's a heck of a crash course, by the way.
Right, exactly.
I just want to find a place to live first.
Yes, exactly. So if I go a ways and not know something, okay, that's okay. I feel like I'm just not going to act like a know-it-all. I'll learn it in time. I think another thing that helped is that from a player standpoint and the way the organization was, like the winds were shifting. Like it was moving out of the Jim Thome, Bobby Abreu era and into the Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, Ryan Howard era. And so those things that happened in the near past, they were kind of past. And this was a new dawn, really, for the organization. That was the beginning of I got there in 2006, and they were in the playoff race. That was the year they traded Abreu. They had traded Thome prior. This was like the start of a new era. So from that standpoint, I could kind of just ride that wave. They were so good so quickly that we didn't have to spend a lot of time reminiscing, right, to kill time on the air. Right. And then as far as the fans accepting you, I think I honestly, and I've said this many times, I just feel like they liked Larry and Larry liked me, or at least he acted like it. Philly is, I'm sure it's not not unlike a lot of other towns that feel smaller, right? And in that, somebody who knows somebody.
Yep.
And you vouch for that person.
Yep.
Right? And if he says you're good, then you're good, right? My cousin Vito in South Philly, he says that Larry's a good dude, so I vouch for Larry. I'm good with Larry, right? I need an electrician. You call your buddy, and he says, "Oh yeah, I got a buddy," right? Like it's the same thing. People liked Larry, and Larry at least propped me up to be his buddy. So I think I got a lot of. I've said it before. Whatever the opposite of guilt by association is, that's what I got. I got acceptance by association, if you will. Maybe the same thing happens with another partner. I don't know, but I would hesitate to discount how much that meant to me being accepted by the fans of Philadelphia in that I was with Larry. And honestly, I've heard Pat Hughes of the Cubs tell this story so often. The team was good when I got there. So, don't get me wrong. I could be the world's greatest or the world's worst play-by-play guy. But the point is that almost every day I was bringing them good news. Right? And like Pat Hughes said, when he started with the Cubs, they lost their first 14 games out of the gate, right?
Get rid of this Hughes guy. He's bad luck.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Like, who is this guy? Every time I turn on the radio, he's telling me bad news. So I had kind of the opposite. Like, I was able to tell people good news a lot. And I think that makes a difference. And whether they realize it or not, I think fans, they're like, yeah, it's cool. Like, there was this cool moment and, let's be honest, Jimmy Rollins did all the hard work. I just was there. So either the team was good and, Larry vouched for me. I'd say those were two big things for me.
Two remaining questions very quickly. One of them, what do you imagine broadcasting COVID baseball will look like? Like, can you imagine doing radio from a monitor in your house? Or is that not even a thought at this point? Hopefully.
Yeah, I've thought about the monitor thing, not for my house. I got 3 kids. It'd just be a disaster. I could never get any it would never work. So I think at the very minimum, I'd have to go to, like, say, an empty studio at the ballpark or something like that. But, I don't know. I'm not – it's not something I'd be real thrilled to do. I'll do it, obviously, if that's all that we can do, is do it off a monitor. There will be all kinds of new challenges. I was reading about, John Shambi and what he's been doing with the KBO. At least I'll know who the players are, and I won't have to take crash courses in pronunciations and things like that. So, I think we're all aware of the fact that this year is going to be very different, and if we have a year, and hopefully it's something that we get the chance to do, because I know a lot of fans. I know a lot of fans want the opportunity to sit back and take in a ball game. I know it's been a rough time for a lot of people. So.
And finally, I did a LaSalle women's basketball game with CBS Sports Network a couple of years ago. Their head coach is a guy named Mountain McGilvory, who's a Philly native. And he has a diary. It is leather bound. It is like 35 years old, where he has written reviews of every single place that sells a cheesesteak in the greater Philadelphia area.
Wow.
It was actually quite incredible.
So these are his own reviews?
His own reviews. Like and it like grades the bread and also like everything.
Right. Which is really all you have to grade. But.
I guess this is a I don't know if it's controversial for you to have to like pick sides, but is there a favorite, and is it under the radar?
There is no favorite. I am an equal opportunity eater. I am so not a foodie. Number one, like Larry and I talk about all the time. We're both like garbage, trash compactors.
The cheesesteak's good then.
Yeah, if it's honestly, if the bread is reasonable, like not stale, and if it's a nice soft roll, then I'm in. And I can get behind it with all manner of preparation, whether it's provolone or, whiz or whatever, I can handle it. But if the bread sucks, then I'm out,
So Texas Roadhouse cheesesteaks it is then.
Yeah, whatever, man. As long as the bread's good, I can start from there and probably survive.
Amazing. All right, that is Scott Franzke joining us here on Play by Play Cast. Many thanks to the voice of the Phillies, and fingers crossed that he has baseball games to call at some point here during the calendar year of 2020. One more thing that I'll finish off on, and then we'll say goodbye. But I love working in college athletics for the reason of I like being around college athletes. I like the intensity that they put into the sports that they play. I love what it means when you play for your college and you wear that university's name on your shirt. Like there's a different vibe when you go to like a Duke game or when you name it. I love the energy around college athletics. Not to say I don't like other sports, but like I happen to love college sports, and if I ever work in another league or organization, like I will still have a special place for college sports. Part of that you witness is how the players grow and mature and develop. And it's funny when you look back and you see like what somebody was like as a freshman, what they're like as a senior, reminding yourself of that, and you go like, wow, this person came a long way. Was really cool last night with everything that's going on in this country. Ishmael El Amin, there's another email. Ishmael El Amin is one of the best basketball players at Ball State right now, shooting guard, one of the best players in the Mid-American Conference. He is also from Minneapolis, and he is also black. His father is Khalid El Amin, the UConn great. And with everything that's happening in the country, particularly in Minneapolis, Ish had the reaction you might expect. And he wanted to do something. And he helped organize. And I say help. Like, he was like one of the chief, like, 2 people, 3 people. I don't know exactly how many people were at the head of it. Helped organize a protest that was peaceful. It was beautiful. Phenomenal march from campus to City Hall in Muncie. Spoke at the beginning, spoke at the end. Like 3,000 people showed up. It was the first time I'd ever been to a protest or a march of that nature. And it was an incredible experience. And to think about the reason why we were all there was one thing. And then to think about the fact that here's this guy who I've covered as a basketball player and who fist bumps me before every game. To think about the fact that he was the one that did it. I texted him last night and I just said, you did something amazing tonight, and I'm proud of you. And it was amazing. It was cool. It was really cool. And it's one of the great things about what we do, and one of the great things about who we get to cover. So with that in mind, hopefully we'll get to cover them again soon. Talk to you next week. This is Play by Play Cast. My name is Joel Gadet, and we are out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.